So it was a while since I last published a video, and there might be a lot of reasons why I didn't do that, but truth be told, I just wasn't feel like it. But now, since the weather outside is quite horrible, I thought it would be nice to go back to the old patterns and record a new video about stuff that would be widely used within model-driven apps. And in this particular case, I'm talking about push notifications within model-driven apps, and not the ones that you might be thinking of in the first place. As per usual, I'll start with the scenario. Let's say we want to have a Canvas application pop up whenever something happens in the model-driven application. We want to open a custom page Canvas application for a user. For instance, when a new event record is created, we want to represent it to a particular user in the form of Canvas application. But here's the catch. We want to open that Canvas application regardless of who created that event record, meaning that one user can create an event record and then the other one needs to get a pop-up of custom page Canvas application. And here's where the things get a little bit complicated, because somehow we need to register an event listener that would keep track of these changes in the Dataverse. That said, this video will consist of these following parts. First off, I'll show you how you can register an event listener on model-driven app scope, meaning that whenever the application is being loaded by the user, our event listeners will start listening to certain events in the system. Then we will go through steps how to open a Canvas application within a model-driven apps using client-side JavaScript functions. And finally, we will create a Canvas application and piece everything together into a working solution. So without further ado, let's go to work. So as I already mentioned, I will start by explaining how you can register event listeners in your model-driven app global scope. And truth be told, it's a little bit of a hack because there is no UI-based functionalities or buttons how you can do that. So in order to register those event listeners, what you want to do is actually create a solution, add your model-driven app into that solution, and then export it as an unmanaged type. Once that is exported, you want to open it in your customizations XML file in Visual Studio Code or code editor of your preference, and then add that event listener as an XML line separately. You can here already see that I already have my solution with model-driven app included. I have some additional components. They are completely not necessary, so you can add them or not. It doesn't matter. And what you want to do is actually export your solution, as I mentioned, in a unmanaged type. So again, you can add additional components or not, it doesn't matter, and just select unmanaged and export it. Once you do the changes in customizations.xml file, you will need then again to import that solution into your environment and publish those changes. Once you downloaded your solution file, now you can unzip it and then navigate to customizations XML file and then open it within your code editor of your choice. And in this customizations XML file, what you want to do is to find your app module, which is the actual model-driven app XML notation, and add 3 additional lines, which are the actual event handlers. You can register more than one event handler. In our case, we will register just one. And this event handler will have the following parameters. First of one is the event when we want to launch it. So in this particular case, it's onload. Then we have a function name, which will be JavaScript client-side function that will need to be ran. And then we are providing the library name in which that function resides. The library name will be the logical name of the web resource that you will import into your model-driven apps environment. Then we have a parameters. I'm not registering any of those. Then obviously we want to enable our event handler and set our isBlocking parameter to false. This one will not allow user to do anything else as long as the code is running if it's set to true, which is a really good way to annoy your users if you're up to. But yeah, in our case, we're just setting it to false. So that's basically it. Now what you want to do is to save your customizations XML file, zip it back together and import into your environment, and don't forget to publish the changes. And then whenever the model-driven app loads, the function that is defined in our event handler will run. And then it depends what kind of logic we're then embedding within our function. So now let me walk you through the code in JavaScript web resource that will allow our logic happen. So as you can see, I'll have my function, which is called listen for notifications. And if you might remember, when we were registering our event handler, we were looking for this particular function. Now this function, it starts by retrieving multiple records, and these records are just DIS event entity, and it contains a filter to just include the DIS process that are false, meaning that I'm searching for Dataverse records that are not yet processed, basically. And after this function, I'm having a couple of callbacks. So if the retrieve multiple records operation was successful, I'm going into a callback function, which is first of all logs my results just for debugging purposes, and then it includes an if statement which checks if I have at least one entity in my retrieved results. And if so, then it means that in the system there are at least one event that is not yet processed, and in this particular case then I want to represent my Canvas application for the user. So then what I'm doing is that I'm using XRM navigation navigate to function, in which I'm providing a couple of parameters. First one is the object of Canvas application. So if you want a step-by-step guide on how to create your Canvas application and how to launch it from navigate to function, you can check my other video where I was going through that specific case. And the second parameter is just the dimensions parameter, how we want to open our application and in what kind of aspect ratio, meaning what kind of width and height of our dialog window will appear. And once that is done, we again have a callback function. Whenever this navigate to function is finished, once it's opened and closed initially, then we will run another function which is again post our console log for debugging purposes, and then it will set the timeout for 5 seconds and invoke the function again, meaning that we're going in sort of a loop. You can imagine then if we have one DIS event which is not yet processed, we will open our Canvas application. Then something will happen within that Canvas application. So once we close it, we will then again set our timeout for 5 seconds and invoke this function. Now, if we don't have any records retrieved, if it's an empty array, then again we will put the timeout for 5 seconds and invoke our function again, meaning that we have this recursive loop of checking if there are any updates in the system, and if so, then we're opening the Canvas application. It is as simple as that. Now, you don't need to rely specifically on the Dataverse. You can also use other sources of information in order to use them as a trigger for your Canvas app. For example, you can call some third-party systems to check if there are any changes there. But just to make it everything more simple, just checking for the changes in the Dataverse. And that's it. Basically, that's our function. What you need to do now is just to create a web resource with this function in the system that would match logical name and function name that we define in our event handler. And then this function will be ran by the system whenever the application loads. So far, we've been able to register our event handlers on model-driven app and also create a client-side JavaScript function that would call our custom page Canvas application into action. Now let's check into the actual Canvas application and let's see how it's being settled. As you can see, it's quite simple. So we have only 3 components, a couple of labels and a button that is actually updating our event record to be processed whenever it is clicked. And additional thing to mention is maybe that whenever application starts, I have certain logic which takes the parameter called record ID, and based on that record ID, it fetches the actual record item from the Dataverse that is being used later on to represent that record's name in the Canvas application. And that's basically it, nothing more to it, apart from the fact that you also need to include this Canvas application into your model-driven app so that the client-side JavaScript function could invoke it. Now let's jump into actual model-driven app and let's see how it works. So you can see that I already opened my model-driven application, and to make things a little bit more interesting, I also opened the client-side JavaScript function in developer tools to see how everything is working on the spot. So in the console area, you can see that every 5 seconds I have a console log saying that entities array is empty. And that is happening because my code is trying to retrieve DIS event records every 5 seconds. And since there are no entity records with DIS processed status of false, I'm getting an empty array, and therefore my dialog is not being opened. But if I would go now into the events, you would see that I have one event called lunchtime. And if I would open it, I can then change the processed status from yes to no, which will mean that my event lunchtime is not yet processed. And now you can see that I'm being represented with the custom page Canvas application saying that it's lunchtime. Now I can ignore it and continue working with the system, and then every 5 seconds again I will be represented with the same dialog saying again that it's lunchtime and maybe it's time to go. So I could say that, okay, handle the event, meaning that I will update my event record from processed false to processed yes, and that will again make this dialog disappear, because again, there are no entity records that are not yet been processed. And that's basically it. That's the whole functionality. And you can stretch your imagination how differently you can utilize this functionality to cover so much more business cases than this simple scenario. And this is more or less everything that I wanted to share with you this time. If you find this video interesting and helpful, please give it a thumbs up and even maybe consider subscribing to the channel. And if there are any additional questions that you might want to ask, feel free to leave a comment below or contact me directly in LinkedIn. I will be more than happy to answer those questions. And as per usual, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.